Life and death, it's all a dance. Talking love and giving chance. Laughs and tears, we're here to share. Join us now, we're always there.
Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that today's episode covers sexual assault. This is a deeply sensitive topic, and we encourage you to listen in a way that prioritizes your well-being. If you need to step away, take a break, or seek support, please do so. Resources for survivors will be shared in the information for this episode. Hi, Genna. Welcome to part 2 of our episode series. Talking to some folks from PAAR. We had Will on the last episode, and today we are having Katie. If you want to just explain what Katie does and what our conversation is going to look like.
Yes. So Katie is the Advocacy Manager at PAAR, again, Pittsburgh Action Against Rape. And she is going to talk to us about the process after an assault occurs, what someone could go through as far as how to report and what services are available, and just an overview, I guess, about conversations and conversations to have with loved ones or support systems. I think she'll be a wonderful addition to our monthly series, not a series, our month, speaking of sexual assault.
Yes, this will be a very good conversation as well. So, hi, Katie.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm all right. How are you all?
Good, good.
Awesome.
So, Katie, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do at PAAR?
Sure. So I am an advocacy manager. So I work on the victim response team, which is our team of advocates. We do court accompaniment, we do medical advocacy, we do a ton of different things, crisis response. And so that's the team that I work under. We have, there's 2 of us who are managers, and then we have 5 full-time advocates, as well as our overnight advocates, which there are 5 of, and our slew of volunteers.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, I kind of just wanted you to go over the process of like when an assault occurs, what the steps are that somebody could take.
Sure. I appreciate that you said could take, because there's a lot of different options and there is no
Right.
right or wrong for any given person. There are a lot of choices. One thing I like to stress is that it's really important that someone knows it's their decision who they share information with, first of all, right? So who do I tell? Who do I talk to about this? Whether it just happened or, it's been some time. So that's one of the most important things. Practically speaking, if someone were to call our helpline, for instance, and say, hey, I just had an experience. What do I do? Where do I go? One of the first things we might suggest for them is to visit an emergency room for a lot of different reasons. One, they can just receive medical care. So get checked out medically. Are you okay? Do you have injuries that you don't know about? You can receive medications in the emergency room to prevent STIs, pregnancy, HIV. And it's also an opportunity for evidence collection if someone is interested in that. Now, it's important to know that everything I just said is all optional. No one's required to do any of that, even if they show up at the hospital. Going to the hospital also doesn't automatically get police involved. And I'll throw a disclaimer in there that I'm speaking to what exists for us locally here in Allegheny County, and generally Pennsylvania. Things may work differently in different places. So I would throw that out there. But typically, you can go to the hospital, receive any or all of what I just mentioned without ever getting police involved, which is something different than you often see on TV and in the movies. So I do like to clarify that.
Yes, yes. So with PAR, what happens with you at that point when someone makes the conversation? What occurs then on your end?
Sure. So we encounter folks in a lot of different ways. So one, like I mentioned, through our helpline, it may be we're meeting them in the hospital. So if someone does present to an ER in our county, we will meet them there and be with them through the entire time that they're there, help them understand their options, help them make those decisions. We are not absolutely there to tell anyone what they should or shouldn't do, but more so to help them to know what's available and what feels best for them. So that's what that looks like in terms of that immediate response. We also meet folks throughout the community. Folks get referred to us by other providers, or stop into one of our locations where we do walk-in hours, things like that, and we can kind of offer a lot of that immediate, we call it options counseling, right? So talking through, what are my options given my situation? No one is ever required to tell us everything that happened or talk through their entire experience. That can be really overwhelming, especially if they're considering going to police or involving another system that is going to require them to talk a lot about their experience. It's important that we make sure they know we don't need to know anything that they don't want to share with us. We're not going to ask.
That's great to point out,
Yeah.
because I don't think people realize that, and I love that you said that.
Mhm. I do think it's a huge barrier that we see, that prevents people from wanting to reach out to us in the first place, because of that fear that, like, this is just one more person I'm going to have to explain everything to. And so typically we do our best to, depending on the situation, when someone comes to us, whether that's through the helpline or any other way, to say, hey, you don't owe me any information. If you have questions for me, I may ask something just to get a sense of what your options might be specific to your situation. But I'm never going to ask you to talk to me about anything that feels uncomfortable. And obviously we can stop at any time. Everything is always optional, right? You can tell me to leave, you can hang up the phone. Like, we don't have to ever continue if you're uncomfortable.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so after they're in the ER, and go through the exam, then kind of what happens after that?
Sure. So if someone does choose to seek that medical care, and we're able to meet them there and talk them through that process, we would want to make sure that they're connected with us ongoing if they want to be, if they want any further support with really pretty much anything. If it is, I don't want to talk to police, but I'm not sure, and I want to, think about it and then talk to you again about it, great. If it's, I might want resources for housing because, now I feel unsafe at home. Or if it's, I may want to talk through like getting a protection order or other forms of civil justice, we can talk them through those options and, again, accompany them through those processes, whatever that might look like. A lot of times it may not involve any systems or processes at all, but it's, hey, I can be just a support for you. I can check in with you every so often. I can be someone that's, not a family or a friend that's, maybe has a different relationship that, you can kind of unload on or process with, or, have someone to check in on a rough day or somewhere to go.
Okay.
So we offer a lot of that kind of ongoing support, whether or not there's that system process happening.
Okay. And then if they do choose to press charges, what does that look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot that depends on jurisdiction. There's a lot that depends on the specific law enforcement agency that they might be working with, for specifics. But that is something, again, that we can be there every step of the process with them. If they make a report in the hospital with police, there is likely going to be follow-up conversations, with detectives, with investigators, and we can make sure that we're there for that, that they have support for that. A lot of times we'll arrange to have those meetings at PAAR so that it's in a space that's like a little more comfortable than a police station,
Right.
for folks, and help with communication with law enforcement, communication with court systems, depending on where things go from there. And then also kind of building in the pieces of just a basic kind of like victims' rights, making sure someone knows what they have, what they're entitled to,
Right.
as technically a victim of a crime. And,
Okay.
we'll put an asterisk by victim because, of course, everyone has their own relationship to that language. And some people choose to use that word. Some people don't like that word. But in terms of what we call victims' rights, there's things like, notification about what's going on with their court case, notification about what's happening if the offender is incarcerated, and their status, and all those types of things. There's the procedural pieces that can, again, be a very overwhelming part of the process for someone. We can kind of take care of that. Make sure that they're connected to those things, as well as things like what's known as victims' compensation. So a program that we have in Pennsylvania, that most states have something similar, that can help someone with potential reimbursement of certain expenses that come along with having experienced a crime. Those things are limited, but that's why we talk to folks. And if they're, if it's something that would work for them, we can make sure that they have access to that.
No, I actually love that you said that, because I can imagine for some people, the idea of paying for like any of this process, paying medically, paying to talk to somebody or an attorney has to be a fear for many, because a lot of people can't afford that. So what do you kind of support them with whenever they come to you and say, I don't have the money for this?
Yeah. So one thing I always like to make sure people know is that if they choose to go to the hospital, most of the time, there's a lot of asterisks to all of this, unfortunately. But depending on what type of care they choose in the hospital, a lot of times that visit is covered. They don't need to bill their insurance. They don't need to pay out of pocket. It's covered by the Victims' Compensation Fund. And again, that's true in our state. Things may look different in different places. But that's something that, they shouldn't have to worry about. And then if they receive care outside of the scope of what that covers, such as like if they need an x-ray or they need additional treatment, and they, do end up getting a bill for that, we can help file a claim through that program to get that bill paid for or reimbursed, which is great. And most people don't know that that exists.
No, that's a very I can't think of the word, very great thing for you to point out, because I think with anything, whenever you're in that situation, there's a fear of, I can't afford to do this, so I'm just not going to do anything.
Yeah. And, there's a lot that we as, our agency can't necessarily provide for someone, but we will do everything we can to get them connected with someone else who can, right? So if there's a resource that, we can't provide personally, we're going to look for who else might have that resource, and try to get you connected to that.
Okay. I love that. So what if somebody comes to you and needs help talking to loved ones or friends, or really anyone, or explaining the situation to anybody that they feel their boss, whatever it may be? What can you offer as far as support in that?
Yeah. I mean, kind of like I said right off the bat, I like to emphasize to people that it's nobody's business that they don't choose to share with, right? So, as much as you can be in control of who you share that information with, you are in control of that. And I talk to a lot of people who feel, some sense of obligation to talk to, especially a parent or a close friend or a roommate or a partner, or, anyone in their life who they have, a close relationship with. And one of the most important things we talk about with people is making sure that the people you're sharing with are, trusted, supportive people in your life, and will be able to be there for you. And we know that, our support people, as much as they might want to support us, don't always support us in the way that's most helpful for us, right? Despite their best intentions. And so a lot of times it's a conversation of, I talk to my parent, my partner, whoever, and I trust them, and they're trying to support me, but they said this thing that just like completely ruined my day, or they responded in this way that really wasn't helpful. And so a lot of times it's, yeah, how can I ask for what I need, right? In sharing this information, and how can I be prepared going into the conversation to say, hey, I want to share this with you, and this is what I need from you. This is what would be helpful for me. So we definitely talk about that with folks. And then, of course, I don't know if you want to get into this, but there's the other side of, we talk to a lot of support people because it's, I don't think any of us are ever prepared for a close friend, a loved one, a family member coming to us and saying, hey, this horrible thing happened to me. That's not something anybody ever wants to have to face. And it hurts when the people we care about are hurting. And so we don't always do our best in responding to that. And so one, just to validate that, like, that's a really hard spot to be in, to see your loved one hurting. And that it's valid to like not know what to say, not know what to do. But also knowing that one of the most important things is them just knowing that you're there, is not dragging information out of them, or asking for more than they're willing to share, but just to say like, hey, if you ever do want to tell me more, I'm here and I'm open. As well as reminding them that they're not a burden. I think that's one of the biggest things I hear from people is, I want to talk to so-and-so about it. But I just feel like I'm taking up too much space. I feel like I don't want to be, or, I don't want to be the friend that's always the downer or always talking about my trauma or always bringing it up. And I think that's a really big thing. And so having a support person who can say, hey, this isn't a burden to me. You're not a burden to me. I want to be here for you in whatever way is helpful, and asking for what someone needs, right? And maybe taking some of that burden off of them to explain their needs, but to say, hey, what would be most helpful? To be okay with saying, I don't know what to say.
Right.
I'm really sorry that happened to you. I don't really know what to say, but I'm here for you. You're not alone, right? Some of the things that, seem really simple, that end up being the most helpful and powerful for people, to hear. Saying, I believe you, that's a really powerful, simple, but powerful, thing for someone to do. And, another thing that comes up sometimes is just reminding folks to, like, if someone does open up and share that with you, keep it private, right? Like, don't share someone else's information without their permission. That can be, something that ends up being more harmful than helpful, even if the intentions are good.
So, if someone does not, and I know you're available as far as speaking with somebody and guiding them through the process, but if someone does not have a support system and they just kind of feel like, I have nowhere to go, I have nothing, no one to talk to, I don't know what to do, I'm afraid, what step would come next for you?
Yeah, that's unfortunately something that comes up a lot. So one, brainstorming with people, a lot of times people do have support that they're not thinking of as support. So getting creative and thinking about like who is there in your life that may be a supportive person that wouldn't immediately come to mind. But then also encouraging other types of community support. So, when we talk through with someone, hey, in a hard moment, who can you lean on for support? Sometimes there isn't a natural support. Sometimes there's not a friend or family member that can be the answer to that question. And so working with someone to figure out, okay, well, who else might you be comfortable leaning on?
Do you ever have people that come to you that perhaps experienced something a long time ago? Is it always somebody that's just gone through something, or could it be somebody that, you know, years ago experienced this and now is finally maybe at a point where they feel comfortable sharing or looking for resources? Is that something that you ever get?
I'm glad you asked that. Yes, a lot. We will serve and talk to anyone, no matter when they experienced their trauma. It could have been yesterday. It could have been 50 years ago. We've seen both. We've seen everything in between. In fact, it's really, really common for folks, to maybe not seek out a resource, right away for a lot of reasons. But we see, especially, I will say, especially With male survivors, we see a lot of folks not talking about what happened to them until they're well into adulthood. So when it comes to male clients specifically, we see a lot of younger kids and then older adults. Not a ton in that middle range, because a lot of times, yeah, folks aren't talking about it right away. And like I said, there's a lot of reasons for that. I'd say, disclosure of any kind of trauma, but especially sexual trauma, is a process. It never just, not never, but it often doesn't happen all at once. Often it's someone attempting to share with someone close to them, and based on that response is how they may move forward, right? So if the first person they try to talk to about it is dismissive, doesn't believe them, doesn't show that unconditional support, they're not really likely to want to talk about it more or try that again. Because that initial response showed them that, like, oh, okay, what I have to say isn't valid and doesn't deserve space. Or, people aren't going to believe me. XYZ, fill in. There's so many different messages that we get from that. And so, yeah, so it's a lot of times that, it could be a couple months, it could be a couple years. It's a lot of times that folks may not have awareness of what happened to them, either conscious awareness that it happened, or a sense of, hey, what happened to me wasn't okay, or this incident wasn't okay. We can blame that on a lot of things. I think a lot of that comes from just we don't do a great job of talking with kids when they're little about consent, about boundaries, about healthy relationships, about sex in general, about making sure that they're aware of, their bodies and what feels safe to them and what doesn't. And so, they may not have the language or the ability to recognize that something that happened wasn't okay, whether as a child or as an adult.
Very true.
Yeah.
What about confidentiality? So if someone calls in or they're getting services from you, how does that look?
Yeah, so we are completely confidential. There are some exceptions to that it's important to us to be very transparent about with folks. One, everyone at PAAR is a mandated reporter for child abuse. I think most service providers in the state of Pennsylvania are these days. But it is still something that we take very seriously and want to make sure that everyone is aware of, especially when we're talking to adolescents, especially, I'd say, making sure that, teens are aware, like, hey, I want you to feel safe to talk to me, and this is the limitations of what, I can keep private. So you can make an informed decision about what you talk to me about, and have that agency. That's something that's really important. And, any other limitations would come to someone's immediate safety. And that's always a process. That's not a, I'm going to hang up on you and call the cops.
Right.
Right. It's we're going to have a conversation. I want to know more about where you're at, because we want to make sure that people stay safe. But those are all very nuanced things. But other than that, we have very, very strict confidentiality. In fact, as employees, volunteers of our agency specifically, we all have what's called sexual assault counselor certification, which gives us absolute privilege in our state. So aside from mandated reporting laws, things like that, we our confidentiality basically supersedes the ability for someone to subpoena our testimony in court, or to subpoena records from a client without their explicit written permission for that. So we do have kind of that extra layer of legal protection on our confidentiality when we do have folks moving through the court system.
Right. I actually received that from PAAR, and it was a fantastic program. And I do encourage people to look into that and volunteering there, because it's just a great experience and very much a learning experience as well.
Yeah, I always like to tell our volunteer classes and folks that are taking the training that it goes with you. Like it helps you to be a good volunteer or employee or intern or whatever, but you also just take it with you in your life, and it's helpful information to just kind of be a human being in the world where people are experiencing trauma all around us, even on our off time, right?
Yep, that's perfect. Very well said. Whenever families are involved, are you able to do like be in conversations with people if they want to talk to somebody and let them know about their trauma? Are you able to be present in those conversations?
Oh, so you're asking about like if, a person wants to talk to a loved one about
Right.
their experience.
Yes.
Sure. I mean, I think it would depend on the situation. I wouldn't say that that's like specifically a service we provide
Right. Right.
in a kind of facilitation way.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of times when, especially when we're working with kids or teens, and sometimes even young adults who have a close relationship with their parents, or the parents are involved because they're younger, that, conversations are happening between all of us.
Right.
I will say anyone 14 and over, has that confidentiality with us. So, if we have a 15-year-old client, we are not required to talk to their parent, guardian, whoever, about what we talk about with them. And I think that's, again, something that we stress with especially teen clients, that like, hey, you can talk to me about whatever you're feeling, whatever you're experiencing. And I'm not going to go tell your mom.
Right.
She can ask and I can say, sorry, that's private. Also, at the same time, providing support to a parent on their own without, commingling that confidentiality, but saying like, hey, you're also going through something, right? And you need support as well. And I think that's maybe something I forgot to mention earlier when we were talking about how to support your loved ones, right? Is getting support for yourself too. But yes, that's a good question. It's not something I would say that happens a ton. It may happen a little bit more maybe in our clinical side of things, like if someone wants to bring in a friend or family member into, part of a therapy appointment, their therapist may be able to help kind of facilitate that. But it's not something I think happens a ton, but
Okay.
we definitely do talk through it with people a lot.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah.
My other question is more of a personal question. For as long as you've been working in this field, have you seen, like, what positive changes have you seen occur, or maybe the opposite in that time?
So kind of in the sexual violence victim
Right.
service type field. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I could say a lot on both sides, honestly. And it's hard to pinpoint, one thing, but I would say kind of on the less positive side, we do have a lot of, I'll say, funding concerns. And that's been ongoing for years. There's been a lot of issues with the way that victim services are funded. And when I say victim services, I do mean agencies like PAAR, who receive federal funding, state funding, to provide services to the community. So it's a lot of community-based agencies, sometimes systems-based agencies as well, or offices that, a victim witness office that may be connected with a prosecutor's office, things like that. But any of those services that look different place to place, but are all offering, critical support to the community, have seen, decreasing funding for a long time now. And that unfortunately translates to less support for folks. A lot of times it's less tangible support. So, some of the more tangible things that we like to be able to provide for people, like, gift cards for basic needs, or, a ride to get to where they need to go, are things that are harder to provide when there's
Right.
less resources for that. And so I'd say that's something that, yeah, like I said, has been on the decline. But I'd say one very positive thing that we're seeing is more conversation, a lot more folks being open to one, not only just talking about their own experiences, but opening up conversations around prevention, around how do we talk to people about consent, boundaries, healthy relationships, right? Navigating someone else's boundaries, right? How do we respond when someone sets a boundary with us in a way that doesn't cause harm? We see a lot of young people being a lot more open to talking about their own experiences with mental health challenges or trauma. I was just talking to someone this morning about that who works in a university, that students are becoming more open in their intakes, right? They're seeing a lot more folks being open to saying like, hey, yeah, these are things that I struggle with, when opposed to even just 10 years ago. They would not say it outright,
Right.
and then it's something that would come up later. And so I think especially our younger folks being more literate about their mental, emotional well-being, and having the ability and comfort level to like talk about it, and not just with providers, but with each other.
So we did talk to Will a little bit about this
Mhm.
as well. But when it comes to being that PAR is Pittsburgh Action Against Rape, I think people sometimes view that is all the sexual assault that happens is the rape part of it. Um, who else can come to you for support that wasn't raped, that can use your services or utilize your resources?
We pretty much serve anyone that's experienced any type of sexual violence. Um, and this is, yeah, maybe something that Will talked about, maybe not, but it is important to us when we talk, especially in communities, when we're doing trainings or even one on one with someone who is processing an experience, that sexual violence is an umbrella term. It does include rape. It also includes a lot of other things. Some that involve behaviors that involve touching, some that don't. And it's important that we include all of that in the conversation, and that we use terms like sexual violence because it encompasses a lot more than what people may immediately think about.
Right.
And so, in one on one conversations, that may look like helping someone process their experience and find language that feels right for them to attach to their experience. Because as we know, trauma often takes away our ability to put language to our
Right.
experiences.
Right.
Um, but then also having that broader conversation in the community about how do we talk about sexual violence? How do we make sure people understand um, that, yeah, the resources are not limited to one
Okay.
specific type of experience.
Can you give me a couple examples of different experiences that you see coming in to PAR?
I mean, certainly there are a lot of folks. Well, I'll start with kind of an example you gave, which is like, hey, someone experienced something a long time ago, right? That might have looked like ongoing childhood sexual abuse, that, may have involved various touching behaviors, may not have. Folks that want to talk about, hey, I've had this kind of strange experience with someone. Is this harassment? Is this grooming? We've seen, we'll talk to folks who experienced workplace sexual harassment, right? Comments, messages from a coworker, a boss.
It's not physical. Like it
Mhm.
can be something where it's words.
Mhm.
And I love that you brought that up because I
Mhm.
I do feel like a lot of people don't put those two things together.
Yeah. Yeah. Or things like, they were recorded without their knowledge, or someone is sending intimate images of them without their permission, sharing those things, whether that's privately with other people or on the internet.
I wish that I actually recognized that that was a service. So I've worked in management for years and years. And I before moving to England was in Pittsburgh, like in a management position. And, you know, when you say this, it's in your head whenever you're a manager or in a supervisory role, you're sort of course of action when something like that happens is, okay, involve HR and then kind of pass it over to them, right? But you don't actually think about the effects that it might have on that employee, or, just kind of like being able, I wish I would have known that that was a resource that I could have given people when they were in that situation, or when they had come to me about, comments that may have been made, or situations that I'm sure, by the book I may have handled in the way that I was supposed to, but I wish that I would have given more support, I guess, having if had I known that it was available through something like this.
Yeah, I think it's really common for us as a culture, but maybe also as women, to kind of dismiss some of those things because they're so commonplace. Um, and folks who grow up experiencing that, whether they're women
Right.
or not, may kind of dismiss those experiences as not rising to a level of, well, I need to seek out support for this. This is just normal. Um, but it isn't, and it's not okay. And it's important that we recognize that, because you're right. The effects of that are, we don't know. We don't know how that may affect someone. For one person, it may not affect them. For another person, it may be deeply affecting. There's no hierarchy of trauma. There's no hierarchy of sexual violence, despite, legal processes and other things like that may put things in a hierarchy, but generally that doesn't exist. And you're entitled to your experience. And if it was harmful to you, then that's what matters. And I'd say a barrier we see a lot, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is just that initial, like, I have to call a cold call a strange number, or go to this place and talk to a new person about maybe one of the worst things that's ever happened to me, or something I don't even have language for. I don't really even have a category for in my mind yet. And we're by no means perfect, but we do our best to make sure that we're meeting someone where they're at.
I meant to bring this up or ask you this whenever we were talking about going to the hospital
Mhm.
and collecting information. How long is that held there, and how long could that be utilized, as far as um, if you don't want to press charges at that moment, how long do you have to come back and revisit that?
That's a good question. That's a really common question. So if someone does choose evidence collection, and I'll reiterate that any and all of the parts of evidence collection are optional. You can opt in or out to as much or as little as you want. But in Pennsylvania, we have the ability to have someone get evidence collected and have it reported anonymously. So I use air quotes there, because if they once evidence is collected, it does have to go into the custody of law enforcement. So law enforcement comes and gets it no matter what. But someone has the option to remain anonymous. So they can choose to talk to law enforcement and seek an investigation for that, or they can remain anonymous and law enforcement will still take custody of the evidence. But then the survivor actually has a lot more control over what happens to it after that, and it gives them a little bit of a time buffer to think
Right.
about, do I want to talk to law enforcement? It gives me the option to do so later on if I do change my mind or choose to, but there's no
Right.
obligation to do that. And at that point, law enforcement wouldn't even have their name or contact information to be able to reach out and do
Okay.
anything with it. That looks different if they're under 18, and it looks different depending on the incident. So I don't want to ever make a sweeping statement about you always have this much time, because it does get a little tricky.
Right.
But I would say for the most part, that's what that looks like. And either way, it has to be today.
I think that's so important for people to hear, because when you're in that situation, I don't want to say the last thing you want to think about, but the last thing you really want to think about is talking to more people and
Mhm,
making that huge decision at that moment.
mhm,
Or even just saying no at that moment, and like a solid, I don't want to do this.
mhm.
But once everything has processed, that might change. So I think it's very good to hear that.
Yeah, it is a very it's something that's really helpful for people who are feeling that I don't want to commit one way or another. I want to still keep my options open later, which is, why we offer that. Well, we don't offer it as an option. That's why we make sure folks know that it's an option if they aren't sure yet.
Right.
It's really common.
So what do you do for yourself to sort of give yourself a break? Because I know how intense and difficult it is working that job in this population. What do you do for yourself?
It's a great question. I'd say, along with a lot of other folks in caring fields, I'm not the best at self-care all the time.
I was actually looking to you to give me a suggestion, to tell you the truth.
I'm really good at suggesting ways other people
Oh,
can
yeah,
care.
yeah, we are. We're the greatest at that.
I will say my absolute number one thing that keeps me grounded are my pets. And that's the one thing I talk to folks, if they have pets, how can you keep your pet with you in the moments that you're feeling the most, whatever,
I love
anxious,
that.
scared, stressed, trauma's coming up. I think animals are just one of the best kinds of medicine that we have.
Katie, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. We always like to end every episode with a glimmer, which is the opposite of a trigger. Genna usually does not come up with one, even though she was given advance notice today that she would need to come up with two. I assume she has one.
I do. It's gonna be very hard
Well
to
done.
top my one earlier that was my ginger scone that I loved. This one is I can't slack on this one like I did the last time. I think for me, just having this conversation and being able to be in this conversation, whereas like a few years ago, I wouldn't have been able to be comfortable in this space. And it would have kind of sent me spiraling. But the point that I'm at, I'm not spiraling. And it's a very good conversation for me and makes me recognize more about what I do and why I'm doing it. And so I really appreciate that from you. And you were incredibly supportive and helpful in that.
That's beautiful.
There you go, Noelle. How about that one?
So Katie, usually our glimmers are a lot more ridiculous, but today we are well, except for Jenna's scone one. That was a little weird. But yeah, no, I kind of along your lines, Jen. I think um the fact that people I'm very grateful. I mean, this is a big giant glimmer, and it hopefully it doesn't sound, too ridiculous or offensive, but I am very grateful that I have not experienced a sexual violence. But I think the fact that people have been willing to share that with me, and share their experience and trust that I um can maybe just listen to that information has been something that, I didn't realize until probably recently having these conversations with you, Jenna, especially, just like what a privilege that is, that, and how much people trust, another person in that moment with something that is so huge. So yeah, that would be my one glimmer. My second glimmer though, Katie, is that our cockapoo dogs just had their face haircut. And so now we can see one of their sets of eyes that we haven't seen since they're not really mine, they're my in-laws, but we haven't seen her eyes since we brought her home. And she's a beauty. She's a beauty. Didn't
You
realize just did not realize how beautiful she was until yesterday whenever she was running across the lawn. I was like, "Oh my god, I can see your face."
Well, I will say, for a less serious glimmer, back to animals, we adopted a kitten a couple weeks ago, and she is just brings a ton of fun energy into the house, and she is kind of looks a little like a gremlin, so we call her Gremlin.
Oh,
Um,
I love that.
she's a little ball of chaos, but she's always a glimmer. She's the sweetest little thing. Um, and then, yeah, I guess just to kind of echo what you said, Noelle, I think one of my biggest glimmers in this work in general too is Feeling, the privilege and the trust that people put in me when they share their stories with me, and allow me to walk through some really challenging stuff with them. That is one of the things that keeps me coming back. Despite all the challenges, despite the big systemic societal challenges that we just unfortunately face every day, just those one-on-one moments with folks that you let me into your story and into your space a little bit, and that really, really means a lot. Thank you both so much. I appreciate you making this space for it, because, like I said, it's really important, and the more we're talking about it, the more
Absolutely
we can do about it.
If you or someone you know has experienced a sexual violence, RAINN.org is a nationwide 24/7 support. You can also reach out to Genna confidentially at GennaMarieLifeCoach@gmail.com. GennaMarieLifeCoach@gmail.com. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Life and Death Podcast. Please be sure to leave us a review and comment to let us know what you thought of the episode. And don't forget to follow us so you never miss an update. You can email us at lifeanddeathpodcast@gmail.com. You'll find Genna on Instagram under the handle Genna Marie Life Coaching, and I, Noelle, can be found at Noelle E. Carlin.
Life and death through ups and downs, finding smiles beyond the frowns. Stay with us, we'll light the way. See you next time, bright and gay.